This video is proudly sponsored by Gamersgate. Download games anytime, anywhere. Visit Gamersgate.com.
Welcome to Elder Geeks Elder Speak. Today is Tuesday, June 19th, 2012. My name is Randy Yasenchak. I'm the editor of ElderGeek.com. Thanks everybody for actually commenting on our top games of E3 2012 over the weekend that we posted. Mott's put that one together, Gavin wrote the script for it, and I did the audio for it earlier last week, and I'm glad that it actually turned out as well as it did. A couple of people were complaining about the music that we had in the beginning of it, which I thought was kind of funny because, hey, I thought it would be nice that we would actually have some music in one of our videos, but some people just really did not like Mott's taste in music. And let's see. There was a lot of people that were actually really kind of mad at us about our omission of Dishonored from the list, but I kind of want to stress that just because a game is omitted from the list, it did not mean, or it does not mean, that we aren't excited about it. I'm sure, you know, Dishonored actually looks like a pretty cool game, and we are definitely keeping our eyes on it, but we just kind of liked the games that were on the list a little bit better. A lot of those games kind of came out of nowhere. We had heard of Dishonored before, but Star Wars 1313 was kind of out of the blue, and we were all kind of pleased to see its presence, kind of thing. But I kind of wanted to also explain how that whole process worked. Everybody that writes for ElderGeek.com, actually, we all voted on what we wanted to see in the list. We all kind of listed our 10 favorite, or our 10 picks basically from E3 2012, and there was a whole pile of games on there, but the way it kind of worked out was the games that got the most votes ended up in that way. So it was a pure numbers thing, you know. Watch Dogs though was like the clear hands down winner. I mean, I'm almost certain that one was picked almost nearly unanimously amongst everybody, and it does that just looks really cool. I was really hoping to see more games like that one at coming out of E3. But anyway, I don't want to go into too much of that. I'm going to touch on a couple of news topics today, and then towards the end of the show, I'm actually going to be doing some user comments and a letter that actually got in, and it was a pretty good letter. Kind of goes off on a tangent a little bit towards the end, but I got the gist of it, and one of the comments that I actually wanted to touch on as well. But first things first, a couple of news topics. EA's Origin, of course, everybody's favorite digital distribution service. You know, they sell only EA products. Not too long ago, they actually came forward and they basically bashed Valve and Steam. Or I don't want to say they bashed, but they kind of caught them with a little bit of a ricochet in their comments, saying that they would never, ever sell their games at a severe discount because it reduces the value of their intellectual property. Fair statement. If you feel strongly about your intellectual property and you feel that they're only going to sell and they're only worth X dollars, then yeah, let's stand behind yourself and say my game is worth $40 and not a penny less. But then they actually came forward today, and there's just been massive sales on a lot of their games, reducing some things upwards to like 85% and of course 75%. So it wasn't even 2 weeks that they basically went back on their word. And the reason is, video games just don't hold their value as well as they used to anymore. There's so many games on the market anymore. The market is completely flooded, and I'm not saying that Steam and Valve have devalued video games. It's just that I truly feel that there are so many games that are hitting the market anymore that in order for some of these older games to sell almost any copies at all, they need to be reduced in price. Like Dragon Age Origins, here's one of them that they're selling for a ridiculously cheap price. Dragon Age Origins, if it was actually still being sold at full price, I don't think anybody's going to buy it. Maybe a few people who are RPG nuts who just don't have that much time to play games, and they were like, all right, well, this Dragon Age Origins game got great reviews. I should go and check that out. But unless it actually goes on a really big sale, a lot of other people are never, ever, ever going to buy that game. You know, most games actually sell their big chunks within the first couple of months of their launch, and then after that, a lot of people don't even pay attention to them anymore until they actually go on sale. That's how we gamers spend our money, and that's not a bad thing either. But that actually kind of leads us into something else. So that's story number one. That was actually coming from Rock Paper Shotgun about how EA is basically going back on their word. Story number two is actually about how EA, again, how they want to broaden Dead Space's audience. This is coming from The Escapist. And they are basically saying for Dead Space 3 to be a success, they want to move 5 million units. 5 million. You know how many copies 5 million units is? I mean, that is so many copies. That's number one. That's actually more than Dead Space 2 already sold. Okay, Dead Space 2, I think, according to the article, Dead Space 2 only sold about 2 million units in its first 3 months of sales. And like I said, that's when most games get most of their sales. So if Dead Space 2 only sold 2 million units in that time, and they want to more than double that with Dead Space 3, that means a few things. One, they need to be spending more time in the development of Dead Space 2 and to make it or Dead Space 3 and making it a much more refined experience than Dead Space 2. And that is not me saying that Dead Space 2 is an unrefined experience. I really like Dead Space 2. Two, unfortunately, that means they're going to be dumbing down the game to the point where it's not going to be identifiable to the survival horror audience. Sorry, but survival horror fans don't buy games in the numbers of 5 million. Those are Call of Duty type sales. And so, that leads to the third point, that they are going to make it the most widely spread user experience as possible. So in sum, Dead Space 3 is probably going to be generic to the point of it being super boring. It might sell 5 million units if they also have to do something else. They got to advertise the living crap out of it. And they also can't make it that scary. People don't buy scary games. There are a lot of people out there that actually they're afraid of games. I bet you there are a ton of people that didn't buy Amnesia: The Dark Descent because they were literally afraid of playing it. And that will happen to Dead Space. So they got to make it unscary. They need to make it more friendly for the wider audience, and they got to advertise the living bejesus out of it. Oh, and of course, refine it even further so that non-hardcore gamers are going to be able to look at this game and be like, yeah, Dead Space 3, that looks like a game that I want to get behind. So Dead Space 3, I'm going to call it now. It's going to be super refined, but it's also going to be super average. And it's going to be non-scary. They might have a few those jump scares that'll happen, but otherwise it's probably not going to be scary at all. How could a game be scary when you've got somebody else playing co-op with you? That removes almost the entire fear factor of everything. Why would you be afraid if you get somebody else hanging around with you who also has a gun, who could be looking behind your back to see if anything else is coming, to, have a full clip ready when you're empty? So, there you go. Dead Space 3, calling it now. Not going to be scary at all. Going to be super refined, super average. But, moving on. Microsoft Surface, not to be confused, by the way, with the Microsoft Surface, the gigantic table computer that they've been touting for years now, which I always thought was really cool. But come on, who's going to put a giant table in their house when your iPhones and iPads could do exactly the same thing in your droids? But Microsoft Surface is a new tablet that was announced by Microsoft today, and it's going to be coming in two different versions: the Windows RT tablet and the Windows 8 Pro tablet. Now they're actually hoping to launch these around the same time as Windows 8 or a few months after Windows 8. Now you're probably all wondering, well, why the hell should we care about this? Here's why you need to care about this. One, it's going to be a pretty cool tech gizmo, which, if it's a cool tech gizmo, then I want to kind of get my hands on it. But two, this is really one of the very first times that Microsoft themselves is actually going to be getting into the hardware race. Up until this point, Apple's been doing all of their own hardware, and that's kind of what makes Apple, in my eyes, kind of sucky. I hate to be so blunt, but one of the biggest things about Apple, why it's so expensive, is because they control all of their own hardware. There's no other third company, there's no third party coverage for it. But what makes Windows machines so awesome is that other developers, that other companies can actually take their products and build them. So companies like Toshiba and Acer and Asus can actually make these products. And the fact that now Microsoft is now competing with the people that have been selling their products, it's kind of a big slap in the face of all these other companies. According to the PlayStation blog, they did a large interview with Yoshiaki Hirabayashi, the producer of Resident Evil 6. When asked about the game, he actually said, how long is the game? And it turns out that the game itself is actually going to be more than twice as long as Resident Evil 5. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The reason why it's more than twice as long as Resident Evil 5 is because there's 3 different stories. And like I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, I guess it's a good thing if you felt like Resident Evil 5 was a little short. I didn't think it was too short. It's a bad thing if these 3 stories are all going to be 3 super mediocre stories. So if you have this mediocre experience that's just longer, you just have a longer mediocre experience. I would much rather have a better, shorter experience than just this long, drawn-out kind of Resident Evil thing. So the verdict is still out on Resident Evil 6. It's not going to be survival horror, unfortunately, and I think everybody kind of knows that. But I guess it's going to be a matter of, like, how ridiculous is it going to be? Resident Evil 4 had its share of serious and ridiculous. Resident Evil 5 I thought was almost entirely all ridiculous. So we'll see what happens with Resident Evil 6. The guys actually over on the podcast that actually exists on our site, the Jumpmen podcast, not the Elder Speak podcast, or which we don't do anymore. This is what Elder Speak podcast actually turned out to, was actually this show. But and you know, this show was also Elder Speak plus HUD. We kind of combined the two of them together to make this show. But the guys over at Jumpman Podcast actually kind of made the really strong point that the Leon games were always the really good Resident Evil games, aside from Resident Evil 1. And that was actually a really kind of a cool point that they brought up, that 2, 4, and 6 might be the super great ones. So I'm hopeful for Resident Evil 6 still, but, you know, time will only tell. And again, it's just going to be one of those things that I'll have to see once I actually get my hands on a copy of it. But going into a couple of user comments now. One, coming from Redshift 912. He actually wrote on one of our videos last week. I kind of wanted to toss this out there. He wrote, "Congrats on the clip and indie game of the movie. I thought Elder Geek was a smaller site because you guys don't have a ton of views. Does the website get a lot more traffic? Anyway, happy to hear your voice, Randy. Great success for years to come. Elder Geek has already turned me on to a lot of games that I've only been listening to about for maybe a year or less." So Redshift, thanks for the congrats. Is the site? Are we only a smaller site? Yeah, we're only a smaller site. Unfortunately, we put a lot of work into the site, but no, we're still only small. What he's actually talking about is an indie game of the movie, which you can actually get on Steam, which is how my wife and I watched it. But in Indie Game the Movie, it's about 3 indie games. It's about Braid, it's about Fez, and it's about Super Meat Boy and their development. But before Super Meat Boy came out, I had done an interview with Ed and Tommy from Team Meat, like back in 2010 or something like that. And it was in a podcast, Elder Speak, the podcast that we actually did a long time ago. And the creators of the movie sent me an email and said, "Hey, can we use, you know, any of the interviews that you actually did with Edmund and Tommy in the movie?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." For like 3 seconds in the movie, you hear my voice saying, you know, the very typical, "Hey, welcome to Elder Geeks Elder Speak. My name is Randy, blah, blah, blah. Welcome, Tommy and Edmund." And that was really it. You know, it's not like I've got a big part in the film or anything, but it was nice. I got to admit, like, thinking back on that interview, that was probably my favorite interview I've ever done, and I probably should try to get more interviews for you guys actually on here on Elder Speak. But it's really more of a time constraint kind of thing. I try to put together what I can for you guys. But I don't know. Maybe I should try to get some guests on the show and actually do like legitimate interviews for you. But if you guys wanted to, you could check out Indie Game the Movie. I kind of recommend it. It was definitely an interesting view of the indie world. It was well put together. The music is actually by Jim Guthrie, who did the music for Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery. And it's less about the actual game development and about the thought process going into it, and more about the emotional and even the financial investment that actually goes into developing indie games, and a little bit about the culture as well. So if you're interested in it at all, it's totally worth checking out. It's $10. You know, make a weekend of it. Get some beers, get some friends together, and somebody download it on your Steam and watch it that way. I don't know where else you can get it. My wife and I actually tried to find it on Amazon so we could stream it, like either through our Roku, or if we still had a working PS3, we could have done it through our PS3, but we couldn't find it on there. So unfortunately, we just kind of kicked up our feet in our office and just watched it on on my computer. But so anyway, thanks again, Redshift. Appreciate it. The other email, the question that I actually got today was about the lack of imagination in video games, and I think this is kind of a little bit of an interesting topic. But Urgit, I'm really sorry if I've butchered your name. I'm really sorry. Writes, Dear Randy, I'm not sure whether this is the right place to write to you. It is. info@eldergeek.com is always the right place to email me. Or even randy@elder-geek.com. They both go to the exact same place. But I did not find anything else to where to write you, so I'll give you a shot. Okay, here we go. Topic I want to discuss is video games not being as fun or engaging as they used to be. I'm an avid gamer, and I've been gaming for a long time now, so my opinion has some ground based on years of quote-unquote experience on the field. I think the biggest and most prominent issue nowadays with video games is the lack of imagination left to the player. I'm not saying that games themselves are not being imaginative. No, there are some real stunners out there. What I'm saying is that the games are so full of detail that all the player has to do is just move from one point to the next, period. Old games heavily relied on players' imagination because of a lack of in the audio-visual department. From old MUDs all the way down to the PlayStation 1 and N64, graphical fidelity was not an issue for gamers. What mattered was gameplay and story. Whatever was missing in the environment of the game, I could make up for myself. If the game did not have it, my imagination would do the job. To this day, I consider games of that time period to be the very best ever made. In this era of gaming, it is fairly easy to make environments for titles, to the point where every new game is just a reskinned version of another game. Something like that old Doom clones where we were doing in the 90s. It's so rare to find a truly unique and worthwhile gaming experience. It's a real pity because so much can be done. The last gaming experience I had in recent times has been Amnesia, BioShock, The Witcher 2, and Minecraft. Atmosphere, story, and imagination. True, BioShock and Witcher are beautifully rendered games that stand out, and because of an amazingly deep storylines. The Witcher even goes as far as to make you play completely different stories based on your choices. Most other games, I find them either to be 30-second commercials, the game started and finished, and I'm still wondering what the hell happened. What are your feelings about this lack of freedom of imagination from the player's part? And are we playing the game, or is the game playing us? Thanks for your time and regards. Or thanks for your time. Best regards. Sorry about that little bit of a funny ending on the reading there, but I like that. Are the games playing us? Are the games playing us? No, the games are not playing us. The games are literally the result of, I think, what we've always wanted all of this time. Is there a lack of imagination required in all of these? Absolutely. And I think probably the finest example that I can think of, and I use this game a lot for a ton of examples because I even remembered thinking while I was playing this game when I was a child about how much of my imagination I had to use while I was actually playing it. And I'm thinking of the original Dragon Warrior. A Dragon Warrior, for people who actually haven't played it, it's top down. It is a classic JRPG, and it is a classic in the absolute sense of the word. It is probably one of the most classic JRPGs out there. It's top down. You see your character as he walks around, and he basically has probably about a total of 8 different sprites, where he's 2 where he's walking forward, 2 where he's walking away, and 2 walking left, and a mirror image of it 2 walking right. So yeah, 8 sprites for the main character total, and that's it. He always looks the same. He always has like his little horned helmet, and he's walking around against a flat environment, and all enemy encounters are random in the environment, and as slimes appear, they literally just pop into the main screen, and then it brings up the old classic things where it just says fight, run, spell, and I think that was really about it. Oh, fight, run, spell, item, now that I'm remembering. And basically, even when you hit fight, all he would do would just like draw a line on the screen and then like make a sound when you would hit something. And even back then I thought, man, they're really leaving everything up to my imagination here. I didn't see the sword swing. I didn't see this thing actually attack me, aside from it glowing a little bit on the screen. Some of the animations actually had like fireballs around them. I think some of the dragons actually had fire coming out of their mouths. Aside from that, though, it was all based on sound, that you would hear it would be attacking you, and dialogue boxes that appeared on the screen. And I loved it. And everything about it you had to actually leave up to your imagination. What the inside of the dungeons actually looked like, what your character actually looked like, because when you changed your equipment, you didn't look any different. What the actual equipment looked like. There was no picture of what, a club would look like versus the bamboo pole versus a bastard sword, or leather armor versus iron armor. But I remember they had really cool drawings for it in the instruction book. But anyway, my point is, that was part of the experience. Part of the experience was actually imagining everything about Dragon Warrior and imagining what it was to be that warrior in this situation. But as graphical fidelity became better and better, we needed to imagine less and less, and we all wanted to see more and more. We wanted to see what those dragons looked like and how they acted, to the point where now we're playing games like Skyrim where there are real freaking dragons in the environment, and they land on rooftops and they breathe fire down on you in the streets, and the game literally does things that we probably never even have dreamed possible back in 1986 or whatever year it was that Dragon Warrior came out. So in a sense, I'm so grateful for there not needing to be a lack of imagination in some games. I'm ridiculously grateful. I'm living out some of my nerdiest fantasies in some of these games. And people can complain all they want about how a game might be slightly glitchy or, I don't know, lack of multiplayer support or something silly like that. But when I see games like Skyrim and they literally make some of my young childhood fantasies come true, I can't help but gush over them. But you bring up a good point. These games actually leave no room for imagination, and that also comes into the fact of the scope of the environment, and I don't just mean the size of it, but also the amount of time that we're spending in a game. If you think back on older, let's think back to the actual movie Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi. Here's a quintessential movie trilogy in the minds of science fiction fans everywhere, and fantasy fans probably everywhere, because it's a space fantasy really. But here is this. Here is almost the epitome of sci-fi and fantasy in a trilogy form. The reason why that was so big was because even with those three movies put together, you have maybe at most a 9-hour experience. I think the movies are 2.5 hours long a piece. I can't really remember, but that's it. All right, there's so much room for interpretation outside of these movies. What happens in between the films, etc., etc. So that's why people really loved Star Wars. They almost loved Star Wars more for the story that it didn't tell than the story that it actually told. What happened in between the stories? What type of person was Luke before he was a farmer? What was Darth Vader doing before the war with the rebellion, etc., etc.? How evil was he? What were the atrocities that the Empire was committing? How cool of a character was Han Solo? What kind of antics was he up to before the events of the trilogy? And that desire to find out about these things manifested itself in fan fiction and fiction, in the forms of in the books everywhere. So that's where people's imagination kind of kicked in and filled up the space. But when it comes to video games, we're already looking at an 8-9 hour experience for just one game. And when it comes to RPGs and stuff like that, we want even longer experiences. So we are literally almost whittling out all room for imagination when it comes to RPGs and when it comes to story-based games, just because we want a longer experience. So if what's funny is if somebody came out and they put forward a game that was if somebody put out a game that was a 2-hour experience. Oh, here's actually a perfect example. If somebody put out a game that was a 2-hour experience and said the next episode is going to be in a couple of years, and then they put out the next experience that was a 2-hour experience, and then they're the next episode is going to be another 2-hour experience, and we're going to come out in a couple of years, people would go nuts about what is possibly going on in that universe. And here's a perfect example of that. Half-Life. Half-Life 2 and the Half-Life storyline is actually pretty cool, and it actually leaves a lot of room for imagination. What happens in between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2? What is going to happen between Half-Life 2 and Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and Half-Life 2 Episode 3, or Half-Life 3, whatever they do. So it's almost like the smaller chunking or the smaller episodic experience is what really kind of opens it up for imagination for people. I don't think that it's the games themselves. I don't think that games like games that fill in the cracks a little bit more, like the Assassin's Creed series, or I'm trying to think of something else, or the Final Fantasy series now. I don't think it's that they don't want to leave room for imagination for gamers. It's just that they can't leave that much room for imagination for gamers, because we as gamers want such a long and fulfilling experience. They fill in almost all the cracks for us, and they don't leave any room for imagination. And I don't think that they necessarily want to do that. I would imagine that would actually be kind of tiring for a creative director on larger games like that. So that's really my 2 cents. I think, honestly, the best and one of the few ways to leave room for imagination in video games is to either shorten the video game experience, which, quite frankly, I don't want, or 2, you're going to have to cut back in other areas. They almost manually have to leave space for that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's kind of sad to say, but that's really it. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think we're really bound for a new golden age of gaming, either next generation or the generation after. 'Cause I'm with you, man. I miss those older games where we had to fill in our imaginations. I think people do a lot of that with simpler games like Minecraft now, where they create their own worlds and their own stories and everything like that for the games. But that's that. I hear you. I think it's sad, but I think it's kind of the natural progression of things. We've been asking for longer and more high detailed experiences for years, and we're getting it. That's that. All right, thanks for the comments. Really appreciate the email. I thought that was a good one. I'm sorry if I actually went off on a little bit of a tangent there. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I will talk to you all soon. Send me any emails or any questions, comments to info@elder-geek.com. By the way, gameplay footage in the background is actually probably going to be some more Krater, which I'm enjoying immensely, and I'm trying my damnedest to finish up so I can get you guys a video review. And I'm sorry if the footage actually if it isn't sequential, because it's literally the footage that I'm going to be using to piece together the video review. So video review for that coming out soon. Those headphones as well. The headphones review is actually written. I just need to finish up Krater so I can write up the review and get it into your hands. And then after that, I'm not sure which project I'm going to be working on. But backtracking a little bit. Email to info@elder-geek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch TV, where Michael and Shen are actually streaming a lot. They've been streaming a lot of The Secret World. And that's that. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope you all had a good weekend, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.